It's been a while since I've done a wine list review. So in this video, I'm going to be reviewing a wine list from a top Italian restaurant and going through and discussing some of the selections that I would make if I was dining there. I'm going to start out by going through white wines and sparkling wines, both by the glass and by the bottle. I'll then do the same for red wines. And then we're going to have some fun at the end, and I'm going to discuss some of the bottles that I would consider ordering if money were no object and we could spend an unlimited amount on wine. This is an area in which I have a lot of experience. As an attorney, I've gone to countless business dinners over the years, and I'm almost always the person who's in charge of ordering wine for those meals. And unless there's a big celebration due to a trial victory or the like, it's necessary for me to make sure that my choices are reasonable so that the dinner expense will be approved. Of course, this video will be useful for those interested in Italian wines, regardless of whether or not you eat at this particular restaurant or not. Certainly all the wines that I'll be discussing are wines that I enjoy from producers that I respect. In addition, whether you're eating at this particular restaurant or another restaurant, I'm going to go through some of my thought methodology and my approach to Italian wine lists, and these are suggestions and tips that will hopefully be useful for you at every Italian restaurant. For purposes of this exercise, I'll be using the wine list from Carbone. Carbone is a famous Italian restaurant that has locations in New York, Miami, Las Vegas, Hong Kong, and my hometown of Dallas. We're going to start off with sparkling wine by the glass, and unfortunately, there's only one selection of Italian sparkling wine by the glass on the Carbone list. You'll see that it's the Bisol Prosecco, which sells for $14. While I'm not normally a fan of Prosecco, Bisol is definitely one of my favorite Prosecco producers, and Valdobbiadene is definitely one of the best regions for Prosecco. This is an area that's a UNESCO World Heritage Site that's located between the Dolomites and Venice. Bisol is currently run by Gianluca Bisol, who's the 21st generation. They do an excellent job, and this is an enjoyable Prosecco in my opinion. The only problem is the markup. This one sells for $14 a glass, and you can get the bottle, in many instances, for less than that, even in the United States. For that reason, rather than just settling for this by the glass option, I'm going to look ahead a little bit and see what they have in terms of Italian sparkling wine by the bottle. Depending on what they have by the bottle and how many people are in your group, you can oftentimes buy a bottle and then divide that up amongst your group, and the price per glass ends up being much less, or at least more cost-effective than if you just purchase by the glass options. And sure enough, here we see the non-vintage Cadalbosco Franciacorta selling for $75 per bottle. This will give you 5 glasses for about $15 a glass, and this is an excellent option. In my view, Franciacorta is a pretty big step up from Prosecco, even from excellent expressions of Prosecco. This Cadalbosco, for example, sells for around $38 per bottle in the United States, so this is only about a double and one of the lower markups that you'll find anywhere on this list. Franciacorta is made in the traditional method, which is the method that they use to make champagne. Of course, the fruit is not from Champagne, but nevertheless, there are some excellent expressions of Franciacorta that I enjoy, and Cadalbosco is certainly one of the top producers of Franciacorta. And for those of you who believe actions speak louder than words, you'll be pleased to know that the 2 to 3 times that I've dined at Carbone, I've started off with this very bottle of Cadalbosco Franciacorta. Carbone has 2 different Italian white wines by the glass. They have a Pinot Grigio for $16 or a Greco di Tufo for $18. Between these 2 choices, I'm a huge fan of the Faudi di San Gregorio Greco di Tufo. Tufo is an area in Campania that has soils that are particularly well suited to the production of high-quality Greco. This is a grape that has very high acidity, and the resulting wines are extremely food-friendly. They also tend to have a minerality or a wet stone descriptor that I appreciate, and Faudi di San Gregorio is definitely one of the high-quality producers of Greco di Tufo and an excellent choice. And in fact, I enjoy this wine so much that when I dined there last, it was not even a by-the-glass option, but I ordered it by the bottle. The other good thing about this wine is that it's the 2018 vintage, and fortunately, Greco di Tufo is also a white wine that can improve with some bottle age, so that's yet another reason that I would buy it. I'm not typically a huge fan of Pinot Grigio, but this is certainly a reasonable expression of it, and there's nothing wrong with this one as well, particularly if those in your group really want to have a Pinot Grigio. And while I'm thinking of it, I have one quick pro tip for you when you're trying to decide between two different wines by the glass. Say, for example, you know that you won't hate the Pinot Grigio, but it may not be that exciting, and you might want to try something like the Greco di Tufo, but you're a little bit scared that you won't like it and that you'll be disappointed. What you can do is just tell the server that you're torn between those two choices and you'd like to request just a small sample of each of them so you can compare them and make an informed decision about which one you'd like to order. That's a technique that I've used numerous times over the years, including as recently as a couple weeks ago, and it's always worked extremely well, and no one has ever refused to do that for me. Next up is Italian white wines by the bottle. This is an area about which I get extremely excited. In Italy, there's so many different indigenous grapes, particularly indigenous white grapes, that you can really get a lot of excellent under-the-radar wines that offer compelling value at their price point. I'll be discussing a few of those wines in this video, but I've also done an Italian white wine video where I discuss 10 top Italian white wines, and if you'd like to take a look at this once you're done with this video, just check the links in the description below. One place that I always check for Italian white wines by the bottle is the Southern Italy section. Campania is one of my favorites. We've already discussed Greco di Tufo, but they also have wines called Falanghina and Fiano that are also worth considering. Typically, these grapes will have naturally high acidity, so even though it's a little bit warmer in the south, they still have some refreshing acid, which makes them excellent pairings for food. And here, for example, you can see another option from top producer Faudi di San Gregorio is the Falanghina, which sells for only $72 per bottle. On a markup, that's still a little bit high in my opinion, but if you're going to divide that bottle 5 ways, by the glass you're looking at $14-15 a glass. So certainly that would be even a little bit less expensive than if you would buy the Greco di Tufo by the glass. Another region I like to check for Italian white wines by the bottle is Piedmont. While Piedmont has some very expensive red wines by the bottle, fortunately, they have some white wines that represent compelling value at their price point. One of my favorites is from legendary producer Bruno Giacosa, and that is the Arnese. Arnese is a grape that was almost extinct a few decades ago, but producers like Giacosa and Vietti saved it from extinction, and now it does fairly well and is a very popular choice. Arnese is terrific with starters, seafoods, and pasta, so it works extremely well for some of the earlier courses at an Italian restaurant. If you haven't tried Arnese yet, it is a little bit lower in acidity, but it's nevertheless a very enjoyable companion with food. It has descriptors that include lemon, apricot, peach, has some minerality to it, and there's typically some floral notes as well. This particular option is a little bit overpriced at Carbone, like most of the wines on their list. Here it sells for about $88 per bottle, so it would run you about $18 a glass. Most places it would be quite a bit less than that, but nevertheless, compared to some of your other alternatives, it's definitely one worth considering, even at Carbone. One of the top white producers in Piedmont is L'Ascolca, and here they have an option from L'Ascolca that again is a little bit rich in terms of price, but is probably again about a 3 times markup, so it's consistent with a lot of their markups on some of their other choices as well. The Veneto region is another excellent choice for white wines, and here they have a couple different Soave Classicos from Inama. Inama is a producer that I've recommended in some of my other videos, and they certainly do an excellent job. This is a particularly good choice if you have seafood. Now we're ready to discuss the red wine by the glass options, and here there are 3 of them. There's a 2021 Volpaia Chianti Classico, and this one sells for about $18 a glass. They also have a 2017 Renieri Brunello di Montalcino, which is $36 a glass. And lastly, there's a Barolo that I enjoy very much that sells for around $26 a glass, and that one is from the excellent 2019 vintage. I'll start by saying that I think that Carbone did a pretty good job with their red wines by the glass, at least in terms of the Italian choices. These are all plausible options, and you can't go too far wrong with any of them, although the prices are a bit rich, as mentioned. Using process of elimination, I would probably drop the Brunello to start with. 2017 was not a particularly strong vintage for Brunello, even though this producer did a fairly good job that vintage. Also, $36 is quite a bit to spend by the glass, so for that reason, they probably don't sell as much of this one, and that means that they may open a new bottle to pour your glass. This is one that will probably take a little bit of time to open, and so unless you plan to nurse this over an extended period of time, you may not be able to appreciate this wine at its best. Moving on to the Barolo, some Barolo can have extremely grippy tannins and not be particularly enjoyable in its youth. Fortunately, however, this particular Barolo is a softer expression and one that shows reasonably well even when it's young. 2019 was also an outstanding vintage, and this is definitely a decent choice if you're interested in trying a Barolo and having Nebbiolo with your meal. But I'm also a big fan of Volpaia and their outstanding Chianti Classico, which is made from Sangiovese. This is also an excellent choice. My only comment here is that if you decide to go this route, definitely get it by the bottle, and you can get it by the bottle for around $64, which would amount to about $13 per glass, rather than $18 by the glass from the by the glass menu. Even if you're by yourself or in a small group, if you don't finish the bottle, you can always cork it and take it home and enjoy the rest of it the next day. If you're interested in wine recommendations, wine collecting strategies, and learning more about wine, please do subscribe to my channel. I've been collecting wine for more than 15 years and also have a level 4 diploma from the WSET. So I have both formal certification as well as substantial practical knowledge from the School of Hard Knocks. When you're talking about Italian red wines, you have to start with the so-called killer bees, Barolo, Barbaresco, and Brunello, and you might even add Super Tuscans to that list. Unfortunately, at Carbone and most other Italian restaurants, these tend to be extremely overpriced, much like NAPA Cabernet at steakhouses in the United States. And indeed, I scoured the list in quite some detail and was not able to find too many bargains that jumped out at me. I definitely recommend looking at the wine list ahead of time, especially if they have prices online, so that you can try to narrow your choices before you arrive at the restaurant to avoid annoying your guests. But if you don't have an opportunity to do that, or if, as most places, they do not even have the prices posted on the website, then you're going to have to make a quicker decision on the fly. But what can help short-circuit this is if you have a representative wine in mind, and then you can do a comparison between the retail price of that wine and what it's selling for on the wine list. For example, I know that the Produttore del Barbaresco should sell for about $50 a bottle in the United States retail. Here, however, I see that it sells for about $140 per bottle. So I know that it's almost a 3 times markup, probably a 3 times markup of the wholesale price on this list. Unfortunately, that's pretty much always the way this quick analysis goes for Barolo, Barbaresco, Brunello, and Super Tuscan wines, except perhaps when I'm in Italy, but even sometimes there. So for that reason, we're going to move on to Plan B. For Nebbiolo fans, one of my favorite tricks is to go to the Alto Piemonte section. Here, unfortunately, they only have a couple choices, but previously when I've dined at Carbone, they had a couple excellent options, including some with some age on them, that were only about $150 per bottle. I've also had good luck using this technique in places like Napa Valley and other places that have excellent selections of Italian wines and may have a few good options of Alto Piemonte wines that go under the radar because most people simply don't know about them. Many restaurants, however, do not have Alto Piemonte wines, or they may not have an excellent selection of them. And if that's the case, I'll typically move back to Piedmont, but then I'll look for things like Barbera rather than Barolo and Barbaresco. In fact, even when I'm in Italy and a place may have a large selection of younger Nebbiolo-based wines, such as Barolo and Barbaresco, for somewhat reasonable prices, in many instances, I'll still get a Barbera. This is true for a couple reasons. First, like Nebbiolo, Barbera has high acidity, but the good thing about Barbera is that unlike Nebbiolo, the tannins are not grippy, and so it's much more approachable. And this is so even in its youth. So you can get a very enjoyable, fruit-forward wine that has high acidity and that does not require an extended decant or substantial additional bottle age before it's enjoyable. Unfortunately, however, there's a lot of pedestrian and uninspiring Barbera being produced, so it is important to be selective and to pick a top producer when you're choosing a Barbera. Two of my favorites, Roberto Vuorzio and Giacomo Conterno, are not on this list, unfortunately, but they do have some good options. Michele Chiarlo does a good job with Barbera, as does Aldo Conterno. While Trentino and Alto Adige are known as sources for sparkling and white wines, here there's actually an intriguing red wine on the list, namely Lagrein. For those of you who like Syrah, you might be tempted to take a flyer on Lagrein at some point. I find it to be quite similar to Syrah, and I'm a big fan of it. So particularly if you're going to be ordering some red meat at an Italian restaurant, you might take a flyer on one of the Lagrein options if they have it. Chianti Classico is another one of my favorite red wines at Italian restaurants, but I've already discussed Volpaia at some length, and I've done a complete comprehensive video on Chianti Classico as well, so I'll link that in the description below if you'd like more information about Chianti Classico. Abruzzo is another compelling source of value on many Italian restaurant wine lists, but unfortunately here the prices are a little bit obscene. Tiberio, for example, is a wine that you can typically get for around $20 per bottle, but here they're selling it for almost $100 a bottle on the list. We are almost ready to move to the part of the video where I discuss the wines I would consider with an unlimited budget, but there's two other regions that I often consider when I'm purchasing red wine by the bottle at an Italian restaurant. Sicily is one of them, but unfortunately I again didn't see anything that really jumped out at me here in terms of offering attractive quality for the price. But Campania, which we discussed a little bit in connection with the white wines, is definitely another source of red wine values as well. And when you're talking Campania, you have to be talking about Taurasi. Taurasi is a region that's particularly well suited for the Aglianico grape. Aglianico is capable of making extremely high quality wine. Two of the top producers are represented here, and those are namely Mastro Berardino and Faudi di San Gregorio. Aglianico is definitely a full-bodied wine, and it's a wine that has high acidity, but also some grippy tannins, and so it's definitely better with some additional bottle age. For that reason, the 2014 Faudi di San Gregorio is an appealing choice. The Mastro Berardino is also an excellent wine. It's a bit on the young side, but they're making it in a style that's slightly more approachable than they did historically, so that's a good choice as well. Between the two, the Mastro Berardino is definitely the better wine and my favorite. However, if you're someone who appreciates a little bit more complexity and tertiary development, then you may want to choose the 2014 Faudi di San Gregorio. The other good thing about both of these choices is that the markups are definitely a little bit more gentle than those for the wines generally. These are about a 2.5 times markup rather than a 3 times markup. In just a moment, I'm going to discuss the wines that I would consider from this list if money were no object. But first, one quick practical tip. The problem with ordering red wines at Italian restaurants is that many of them are extremely tannic and require substantial decanting or aeration before they show their best. This is certainly true for Barolo, Barbaresco, Brunello, Sagrantino, Taurasi, and many other Italian red wines. The problem is if you wait to order those wines until before your entree course, they're simply not going to have adequate time to open up and show their best before they're finished or before your dinner is over. So if you're going to be ordering one of those Italian red wines that needs a substantial decant, my recommendation is that you order that wine at the same time you order your white wine and ask the sommelier to pour that wine at the same time. What I've found is that especially in Italy, sommeliers don't like it when you put the wine in the decanter, as they prefer that you see how the wine evolves over the course of the dinner. But they're more than happy to pour everyone a glass from that red bottle at the outset of the meal, and that way everyone can taste it right when it's poured, and also see how it evolves over the course of the evening. In this way, by the time the entree arrives and you're ready to really dig into that wine, it should be a lot closer to being ready than if you would just order it shortly before you ordered your entree. Now we're to the part of the video where I discuss the wines that I would order if there were an unlimited budget. And the first thing I'm going to do is head straight to the Barolo section and look for Giacomo Conterno. I mentioned Giacomo Conterno in connection with the Barbera discussion earlier in this video. Giacomo Conterno is one of the most traditional producers of Barolo, and Monfortino is definitely his top wine. That's a wine that's not only widely regarded as one of the best Italian wines, but also one of the best wines in the entire world. Carbone actually has several options here, including several of which are in Magnum. The problem, however, is that Monfortino is an extremely age-worthy wine, and it develops very, very slowly. And so while 2001, for example, was an outstanding vintage, from a Magnum, this one may even be a little bit too youthful. So I would probably choose the 1990, which they have in 750, for a little bit less than $3,000. Staying in Piedmont, but moving over to Barbaresco, I would probably consider the 1971 Gaia Barbaresco. 1971 was a very strong vintage in Piedmont. While we don't care about budget, it's also worth noting that this particular 1971 Gaia Barbaresco, somewhat surprisingly, sells for a couple $100 less than a 2020 Gaia Sori San Lorenzo Barbaresco. So this is actually probably one of the better values on the list, even though it is a wine that will set you back more than $1,000 a bottle. Next, we'll head to Montalcino for a comparison tasting from two of my favorite producers, Biondi Santi and Soldera. They have a number of strong options at Carbone for both producers. So for Biondi Santi, they have a number of the Reservas, but why not go for the 1946? It's a rare treat to be able to taste the 1946 Biondi Santi Reserva, so we'll see how that compares with maybe the 1988 Soldera. Of course, it would be better if they also had a 1946 Soldera, but we'll get the oldest Soldera that we can, and we'll move on. Each of these bottles will set us back about $2,750. Ornella's Macedo has gotten extremely expensive, and that's especially true for Magnums with substantial bottle age. So we're going to take advantage of this bottomless budget, and we're going to pick a Magnum of 1990 Macedo for $7,995. If you've enjoyed this video and you'd like to know how to approach a steakhouse wine list, please be sure to check the video that is linked above.